There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the driver's seat of a parked car when you are in your early 50s and you finally admit to yourself that something is fundamentally changing. I remember sitting in a rental car in the parking lot of a generic business park somewhere outside of Denver. I was 52 years old at the time. I was supposed to be reviewing my notes for a quarterly sales pitch that was happening in 20 minutes, but I was just staring at the texture of the steering wheel. I was tired in a way that an extra hour of sleep was no longer fixing. But that was not the real issue. The real issue, the thing that was sitting heavy in my chest, was the quiet, creeping realization that my body was no longer answering my calls. I am not talking about the stamina to run a marathon or the energy to work a 14-hour day. I am talking about the very core of our physical response as men. I am talking about the moments behind closed doors when you expect your biology to do what it has always done with absolute reliability, and suddenly, without warning, it hesitates. It fails to launch. It leaves you standing there in the cold reality of a misfiring engine. When we hit our 50s, we start noticing the lag in the system. You turn the key, and instead of the immediate roar you took for granted your entire adult life, there is a hesitation. A moment where you genuinely wonder if the engine is going to catch. And because we are men, and because most of us were raised to believe that acknowledging a physical decline is a form of moral weakness, we do not talk about it. We do not tell our friends over a beer. We certainly do not tell our doctors unless we are pushed into a corner. We just absorb the shock of it, internalize the shame, and pretend everything is perfectly fine while quietly panicking on the inside. I spent my entire career as an executive in corporate sales. My professional life was built on projecting unshakable confidence, managing expectations, and maintaining control over the narrative in any room I walked into. If you do not believe in the product you are selling, the client smells it on you immediately. You have to exude certainty. Well, in my early 50s, I stopped believing in my own physical product. I felt hollowed out. I was walking into boardrooms projecting the image of a highly capable, energetic man in the prime of his earning years. But underneath the tailored suit, I felt like the floorboards of my own house were rotting away. The inconsistency in my physical response was not just a bedroom problem. It became a pervasive shadow. It bled into how I walked, how I spoke, and how I looked at myself in the mirror. When the body stops responding the way you expect, you start searching for invisible fixes. You do not want a massive intervention. You want a quiet, secret solution that you can implement without anyone knowing you are struggling. So I did what every guy does when he is desperate and embarrassed. I went down the late-night internet rabbit hole. I sat in the glow of my laptop in hotel rooms after client dinners, typing carefully worded searches into the browser, looking for a way to fix the plumbing. And I found the universal piece of advice that every health portal, every magazine, and every medical blog repeats like absolute gospel. They told me to do Kegels. The instruction was incredibly simple, almost insultingly so. We are told to imagine we are standing at a urinal. We are told to imagine stopping the flow of things halfway through the process. That is the grand sum of the advice handed down to millions of men who are quietly losing their minds over their declining vitality. Just pinch that muscle. Stop the flow. Do it repeatedly. So I did it. I became an absolute fanatic about it. I approached it with the same obsessive, results-driven mentality that I applied to closing a software contract. If doing 10 of these little squeezes a day was good, then doing 200 would obviously be better. If 200 was good, 1,000 would turn me back into a 25-year-old. I would be sitting on a flight from Phoenix to Chicago, staring out the window at the clouds, secretly squeezing that tiny muscle in my pelvis. I would be sitting at a high-end steakhouse with clients, nodding along to a conversation about quarterly projections, isolating that little valve and contracting it over and over again. I would be driving down the highway in Scottsdale, sitting at red lights in the Arizona heat, just pinching and releasing, pinching and releasing. It gave me the illusion of taking action. It felt like I was actively managing the crisis. I truly believed I was doing the invisible work that would restore the pressure in the system and fix the machinery. But the machinery was not getting fixed. The inconsistency remained. The engine still hesitated. Sometimes it caught, sometimes it did not, and the unpredictability of it was agonizing. If anything, the anxiety surrounding the entire process made the physical response even worse. And this is the part of the experience that is genuinely hard to articulate, even years later, because it touches on the deepest insecurities a man can harbor. When your body fails to show up in the moments that require absolute, undeniable physical presence, you start to manufacture absence. You start to pull away from the situations that might expose the failure. During those difficult years in my early 50s, which coincided with the slow unraveling of my first marriage, I became a master of the preemptive retreat. I would stay up late in the living room answering emails that absolutely did not need to be answered until the next morning. I would manufacture exhaustion. I would complain bitterly about the stress of the travel schedule, the demands of the clients, the pressure of the quotas. I built a massive, impenetrable fortress of perfectly reasonable professional excuses to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of walking into the bedroom and facing the possibility that my body would betray me again. I did not blame my partner. The distance was entirely my creation. I was running away from the shame of a failing engine, and in doing so, I was dismantling the emotional intimacy of the relationship right alongside the physical intimacy. The fundamental misunderstanding I had about the male body at that time was that I was treating it like a collection of completely separate, isolated parts. I viewed the pelvis as nothing more than biological plumbing, a series of tubes, valves, and switches. If a valve seemed loose, you tightened it. If a pipe was leaking, you patched it. It was simple, reductionist mechanics. I thought that by pinching the muscle that stops the flow of urine, I was somehow rebuilding the entire vascular infrastructure of my lower body. But the human body is not a plumbing schematic. It is a highly integrated, deeply connected pressure system. It is an infrastructure. Think about a large commercial building. If the foundation of that building is sagging, if the structural concrete floor is dropping and compromising the integrity of the walls, you do not fix the problem by walking up to the second floor and tightening a single screw on a bathroom faucet. You have to go down into the basement. You have to stabilize the entire base. You have to lift the structural floor back into place. What I eventually learned, through a lot of stubborn reading, a lot of trial and error, and finally paying close attention to how the human body actually generates stability and force, is that the pelvic floor is not just a small, isolated muscle used for bladder control. It is the deep structural bottom of your entire physical core. It is a massive, complex hammock of heavy musculature that holds up the internal organs, manages all the abdominal pressure, and most importantly, for us as men, controls the vast, intricate vascular network that feeds the lower half of the body. When we sit in office chairs for 30 years, leaning forward over keyboards, when we let our posture collapse, when we stop moving in ways that challenge our deep internal stability, that entire muscular floor begins to lose its tone. It drops, it sags. And when that foundation drops, the blood flow changes. The vascularization becomes compromised. The physical response becomes sluggish and inconsistent because the structural environment that supports the blood flow is literally sinking. So I stopped doing the standard exercise. I completely abandoned the Kegel. I stopped pinching the surface valve. I realized that if I wanted the confidence and the capability back, I had to learn how to rebuild the foundation of the building. I had to learn how to change the internal pressure of the entire system. The new approach required entirely different mechanics. It required a level of concentration and internal awareness that I was completely unaccustomed to giving my own body. I started the process at home, alone, usually early in the morning before the sun came up over the mountains. I would lie down on the carpet of my home office, flat on my back, with my knees bent and my feet flat on the ground. This position is crucial at the beginning because it takes gravity out of the equation. It neutralizes the external pressure and allows you to feel what is happening inside. The very first step of this new protocol had absolutely nothing to do with the pelvis. The first step was the core, the stomach. I had to learn how to properly brace my midsection. I'm not talking about sucking the stomach in to look thinner for a photograph. That is exactly the opposite of what you want. I'm talking about bracing. It is the exact specific physical feeling you get when you are helping a friend move a heavy oak desk. You are holding your end and you know the weight is about to shift entirely onto your side. You intuitively lock your entire abdominal wall down. You create a solid, unyielding shield of muscle. Once I had that rigid brace locked in, I would take a slow, deep breath in, filling the lungs without losing the tension in the stomach. And then came the movement that changed the entire trajectory of my physical health. As I held that breath and maintained that abdominal brace, instead of pinching that tiny surface muscle like I used to, I focused my mind on the deep internal structure of the pelvis. The instruction that finally made sense to me, the mental image that finally allowed my brain to connect with the right musculature, was the idea of physically drawing the testicles upward into the deep pelvic cavity. I was not shifting them. I was not adjusting them externally. I was using the deep, internal, structural musculature of the pelvic floor to pull everything upward from the very base of my body. I was trying to lift the entire sagging floor of the building upward against the solid pressure of my braced stomach. It is an incredibly strange, almost frustrating sensation the first few times you try it. You will lie there on the floor, locking your stomach, trying to pull your biology upward from the inside, and you will seriously wonder if you're doing anything at all. You might feel a vague tension around the perimeter, maybe a little tightness in the lower abdomen, but the deep lift might not click immediately. That is entirely normal. We have spent decades ignoring these deep muscles. We have spent decades letting that critical infrastructure sleep while we focused on our arms, our chests, or our careers. It takes time to wake the neurological pathways back up. The brain has to relearn how to signal that specific area. But I kept at it. I am a stubborn man when I realize a system is broken. I would hold that deep internal upward pull for 5 solid seconds while keeping the stomach braced, and then I would completely release the breath and drop all the tension. I would let the system reset. Then I would brace, breathe, and pull up again. I started doing sets of 20 repetitions, just lying there on the floor, breathing, bracing, pulling the floor up, holding the tension, and dropping it. Within a week of consistent daily practice, the vague, confusing sensation turned into a very clear, distinct mechanical engagement. I could finally feel the entire floor of my pelvis lifting as a single unit. I could feel the deep internal stability wrapping around my lower spine and supporting my organs. It was no longer a superficial pinch of a urinary valve. It was a massive structural elevation. I was actively rebuilding the foundation. And here's what happens when you finally rebuild that foundation. The vascularization returns. Blood flow is not magic. It relies on healthy, active, stable, and well-oxygenated tissue. When the pelvic floor is weak, thin, and sagging from years of neglect, the circulation in that entire region becomes sluggish. The pathways are compromised. The physical response becomes inconsistent because the blood simply cannot flow and remain where it needs to be. But when you start aggressively working that deep musculature against the pressure of your diaphragm and your core, you are essentially pumping life back into a neglected, dying region. You are restoring the robust physical environment that allows the body to perform the way it was designed to. I did not see results overnight. I want to be very clear about that. This is not a magic pill. This is not a quick fix that you do on a Friday afternoon to be ready for Friday night. If you are looking for a 30-minute miracle, you are in the wrong place. But I spent my life in sales, and if there is one thing I understand deeply, it is the undeniable value of compounding effort. I understand that small, consistent daily investments yield massive, life-altering returns over the long haul. So I kept doing the floor work. I treated it like a non-negotiable daily contract with myself. Eventually, I got good enough at isolating and controlling that deep upward pull that I did not need to be lying flat on the floor in my office anymore. I started incorporating the mechanics into my normal daily life. I would be walking the dog early in the morning, feeling the heat rising off the Arizona pavement, and I would deliberately brace my core and engage that deep pelvic lift for 20 or 30 strides. I would hold the internal tension, maintain my breathing pattern, and then release it. I would do it while standing in line at the grocery store. I integrated it seamlessly into the light resistance training I was already doing. Every single time I picked up a dumbbell, every time I did a squat or a lunge, I made sure the internal foundation was locked down and lifted before I moved the weight. I made the pelvic floor an active participant in everything my body did. The shift in my physical reality was profound, and it was undeniable. The terrifying inconsistency that had plagued my early 50s, the hesitation that had caused me so much silent anxiety, began to systematically fade away. The engine started catching on the first turn again. The reliability returned. And it was not just about the return of a strong, predictable erection, although I will not sit here and pretend that was not a massive, overwhelming relief. It was about something much larger. It was about the return of structural masculine confidence, when the deepest, most foundational part of your physical center is strong, active, and responsive. You carry yourself entirely differently through the world. You sit in a chair with a different posture. You stand in a room with a different presence. You speak from a deeper place. The crushing anxiety of anticipation completely disappeared. I stopped worrying about whether my body would cooperate in intimate moments because I had reestablished direct communication with my body. I had rebuilt the supply lines. I had fixed the infrastructure, and the infrastructure was finally holding the pressure. I had a routine physical a while back. I was sitting on the crinkly paper of the examination table, talking to the urologist I have seen for years. We were going over the usual standard metrics for a man in his 60s. We checked the prostate health, the testosterone levels, the cardiovascular markers. He looked at my charts, tapped his pen against the clipboard, and asked me a few routine questions about my daily life, my energy levels, my sleep patterns, and my physical response. I looked him in the eye and told him the truth. I told him that at 63 years old, the plumbing was functioning with a level of strength and absolute reliability that I genuinely had not experienced since my late 30s. I told him the hesitation was completely gone. The blood flow was exceptionally strong. The recovery was faster. He raised an eyebrow, looked a little surprised, made a quick note on his digital tablet, and muttered something along the lines of, "Well, whatever you are doing, just keep doing it." He assumed it was just the daily walking, the hydration, the standard lifestyle changes that keep the heart ticking. I did not bother trying to explain the precise mechanics of the deep pelvic pull to him in that moment. A crowded medical office with a waiting room full of patients is not really built for nuanced conversations about the failure of standard advice and the necessity of rebuilding deep structural infrastructure. He had his charts, and I had my results. Alyssa notices the difference. My wife is 9 years younger than me, and she is a woman who appreciates directness and honesty above almost everything else. She used to be an interior design consultant, and she approaches life with a very practical, no-nonsense clarity. When we met and eventually married, I was already on the other side of the worst of my physical decline. I had already figured out the mechanics. I was already doing the work and reaping the benefits, but I did not hide my past from her. I told her about the dark years before she knew me. I told her about the avoidance, the deep shame, the late nights pretending to work on spreadsheets because I was terrified of walking into the bedroom and facing the silence of a failing body. She listened to me, and she did not judge the failure, but she understood exactly what it cost a man to live in that kind of quiet desperation. She understood the toll it takes on a man's spirit to feel broken and to suffer in silence because his pride will not let him ask for help. The relationship we have built together now is entirely grounded in a foundation of absolute physical and emotional presence. I do not have to hide from her. I do not have to manufacture elaborate excuses or create artificial distance. When we are together, I am fully there. My mind is there, and my body is fully, reliably there. That is the ultimate return on the investment I made on the floor of my office. It is not just about the mechanics of the act. It is about the freedom to be intimate without the shadow of anxiety hanging over the bed. So many men are walking around right now, going to work, cutting the grass, sitting in traffic, carrying a massive, heavy, completely silent burden. You are noticing the lag in the engine. You are feeling the inconsistency, the weakness, the lack of reliable response, and you are almost certainly doing exactly what I did a decade ago. You are either ignoring the problem completely, hoping against all logic that it will miraculously fix itself, or you are frantically trying the superficial fixes. You are trying to squeeze a single, tiny urinary valve while the entire structural foundation of your body is slowly sinking into the ground. I'm telling you right now from the perspective of a man who walked that exact same frustrating path that you are not broken. Your body is not finished. You are just wasting your time and energy working on the wrong layer of the problem. You have to go deeper. You have to stop treating your body like a collection of isolated, disposable parts and start treating it like the complex, integrated system it actually is. The blood flow, the physical confidence, the mechanical reliability, the strength of the erection, they all depend entirely on the strength and vitality of that central foundation. If you are a man over 50, you simply cannot afford to ignore the infrastructure anymore. The days of taking the engine for granted, of assuming it will start just because you turn the key, are completely over. Now you are the mechanic. Now you have to actively maintain the block. The work required to fix this is quiet work. Nobody sees you doing it. There is no applause, no audience, no trophy handed out at the end of the day. You just lie on the floor in an empty room, you brace your core, and you pull the foundation back up where it belongs. You do it 20 times. You hold the tension, you fight the weakness, you breathe through it, and then you do it again the next day. And the next, you relearn the feeling of your own internal strength. You rebuild the pathways. And slowly, day by day, breath by breath, contraction by contraction, you watch the vascularity return. You watch the capability return. You watch the confidence come back into the room, not as a projected sales tactic, but as a quiet, undeniable physical reality. This is not about chasing the vanity of youth or trying to pretend you are 25 again. It is about claiming the full, robust capability of the man you are right now, today. It is about making absolutely sure that when you need your body to speak for you, when you need it to show up and perform, it has the structural strength and the vital blood flow to deliver the message loud and clear. The circulation matters. The internal pressure matters. The foundation of the building matters more than anything else. Stop pinching the valve, get on the floor, and rebuild the structure. Simple as that.